7 o'clock on a Sunday night, and you know what that means. It's Topical starts right now. A very good evening to South Africa and those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical, our digital audience with us tonight. Good to see them. Looking forward to getting their questions, comments in a short while. We have a new Miss South Africa, Mia Leroux, born in the Free State, raised in the Western Cape, marketing manager, model, and part-time BCom marketing student. She was diagnosed with profound hearing loss at the age of 1. And says her community rallied behind her to give her the gift of hearing, inspiring her desire to make a positive impact and break barriers. Many will see her win as a celebration of South Africa's rich and inclusive culture and diversity. The build-up, though, to this pageant was less than harmonious. An investigation into the citizenship of one of the contestants, Chidimma Adetshina, Home Affairs saying there was prima facie evidence, or reason rather, to believe that fraud and identity theft may have been committed by the person recorded in Home Affairs records as Chidimma's mother. They also say that Chidimma could not have participated in the alleged unlawful action as she was an infant at the time when the activities took place. We don't know all the answers, right? Investigations are continuing. That must be underlined. But it also gives us an opportunity to talk about the issues that these investigations kick up. The Home Affairs Department calling on South Africans to respect the constitutional rights of all parties at all times and refrain from inflaming the divisions. I'll tell you more about that in a short while. But it leads us to the question of the week. And we're asking you, what do you make of the Miss South Africa identity controversy that led to Chidimma exiting the pageant? Let us know at SABC News_TV. All right, let's head over to the magic wall, get you some context as always. I want to talk about the week's events, right? How do you think this whole controversy was handled? Was it fair? Let us know at SABC TV at SABC News_TV. That's the handle. Perspective coming up. All right, we move on. Let's get you some context there. As always, the magic wall is our friend, and also friend of show is Kenny Mapanga, SABC senior journalist. Thank you very much indeed, Kenny, for your time. Now, important conversations that we're having in terms of citizenship. I think it's important for the audience as well as ourselves to get familiar with the different types of citizenship, especially this one, by birth.
Well, we speak of the acquisition of South African citizenship. The Act tells us that you can either get it by descent, naturalization, and of course by birth. And I think what is in central focus here will be by birth. And if you look at the Act, it states that any person, and that is in subsection 1, the provision says that any person who immediately prior to the date of commencement of the South African Citizenship Amendment Act 2010 was a South African citizen by birth, or who was born in or outside the Republic, one of his or her parents at the time of her birth, being a South African citizen, shall be a South African citizen by birth. Of course, it goes on to state that in subsection 2, that any person born in the Republic and who is not a South African citizen by virtue of what I've just stated in subsection 1 shall be a South African citizen by birth if he or she does not have the citizenship or nationality of any other country, or has no right to such citizenship or nationality, and or his or her birth is registered in the Republic in accordance with the Births and Deaths Registration Act. Then of course another important factor is in subsection 3, where it states that any person born in the Republic of parents who have been admitted into the Republic for permanent residence and who is not a South African citizen qualifies to be a South African citizen by birth if he or she has lived in the Republic from the date of his or her birth to the date of becoming a major, and his or her birth is registered in the Republic in accordance with the Births and Deaths Registration Act. So those are the different provisions that are made for citizenship by birth, which I think will be in central focus when this case is discussed.
So my small brain is trying to process what you just said now. So there's conditions. It's not automatic that if you are born here, you get citizenship. There are certain boxes that you need to tick
Yeah, there are certain provisions
Yeah.
in the Act, and it explains upon which one can be a citizenship, or gain citizenship rather, by birth. And those are the provisions that I have mentioned as we've spoken earlier this evening.
All right, let's go to this issue in terms of the rights that South African citizens have that non-citizens do not have. What are they?
Well, in South Africa, we are unique in that there are constitutional rights that are afforded to all who live in South Africa, whether you are a citizen or not. But of course, there are some rights that are exclusive to South Africans, such as the right to vote. You can have that passport, and of course, you can come into South Africa after living somewhere else when you have that citizenship. So there are some exclusive rights that are afforded to citizens of the country. But of course, those fundamental rights that you see in the Constitution, such as rights to healthcare, etc., are afforded to all who live in the country, regardless of what their citizenship status says in the country.
Now, we would have loved to have the Home Affairs Department, but they're not available today. Control, put up that statement with regards to what the Home Affairs Department has to say. And they are saying that in order to safeguard the integrity of the process, they will not be commenting publicly again until they are in a position to announce the final outcome of the inquiry. So we will wait now and see. As I said, this is an ongoing process. We will see what the outcome is. But help us understand what we know, but what more importantly, what we need to know.
Well, what we understand from Home Affairs is information squarely coming off of the parent, that is the mother of Chidimma Adetshina, and it spoke about the initial indications that they're seeing about their probe into this ongoing matter or question that was brought about by Ms. Essay with the consent of Chidimma and her mother, we understand, on the status of her citizenship. They've stated that there may be a possible fraud that was committed there. Of course, it's very important to note, Blake, that there isn't a final decision from the Minister of Home Affairs, and it is upon the Department of Home Affairs to clarify that position before you can move to any other next step regarding the status of her citizenship. As we know, that statement does not go into any detail at all about Chidimma, only speaks about the registration of her birth and the mother who registered her and how that may have possibly taken place. So upon receiving that final outcome, there's not much you can draw from the case of Chidimma yet. So we'll have to wait the Minister of Home Affairs decision. That applies to court actions as well. We saw that there was an interdict application that was made by a political party to stop her from competing pending the outcome of that finalization of her status. But of course, there's no reviewable decision at this stage before us, as the Minister of Home Affairs has not given an executive decision on, or given clarity rather, on the status of her citizenship.
As I said, though, look, this particular case will get the outcome when it comes out. But it gives us a chance to talk about umbrella issues around that.
It's an opportunity solely to focus, I think, on maybe where the gaps are and the shortcomings are in the Department of Home Affairs,
100%.
as there may be other scenarios or other cases that are similar to such as these and that need the Home Affairs Department to focus on, as the issue of immigration is not unique to South Africa. It is a global issue that takes place in countries across the globe. However, we are dealing with a number of challenges as South Africa, and Home Affairs plays a critical role in the sovereignty and national security of the country. And of course, those issues need to be clarified by the department. We
have an immigration law expert. We'll hopefully get more clarity from his better mind. Thank you for your better mind as well, Chidimma Panga. Clarity of thought in the moment. We appreciate that. All right, on to our regular Word on the Street feature. And we took to the streets of Johannesburg seeking diverse insights and perspectives on this matter. And this is what you had to say. Take a look.
I think these issues or allegations are serious, but it's something that is not new to South Africans. It's a prevalent issue. I know people personally that have had their identity stolen. I know people that have currently identities that are stolen that they're using. So it shows systematic issues that we have within government, and it should be something that is dealt with by the Department of Home Affairs more more seriously and take responsibility for it.
The Constitution states, right, it says that everyone who is in South Africa belongs to South Africa, whether they are foreign or whether they are asylum seekers, whether they are individuals who are undocumented, they are still within the bounds of South Africa, deeming them South African.
If someone is born in this land and has ties to this land and is connected to this land, then they should be allowed to compete as a South African.
I think that there should be measures that are put in place to deal with such matters because they affect people hugely. Apparently, people couldn't go to varsity, couldn't get their matric certificates because of identity theft. So I think that that is a huge drawback in society.
Identity theft or identity fraud is something serious. I believe another family suffered from that because they weren't able to obviously use that name. So I mean the government should actually be taking these allegations quite seriously. People should be punished for doing crimes that obviously hurts another individual. And if you hurt obviously us as South Africans, then how are we supposed to be a democratic country?
All right, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on this matter. Let's get more detail now, dig a little deeper. So many questions. As we've been saying, this investigation continues, but it gives us an opportunity to talk around the issue as well and dig a little deep in terms of some of the issues that South Africa is going through. My guest tonight, Ashraf Essop, immigration law expert, also have a brand expert, Thebe Ikaleng. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for making the time. Also, our digital audience here, good to see you. Please raise your virtual hand if you have any questions for our guests as well. I'll do my very best to get to your comments in a short while. Lots to discuss, but maybe I should start, Ashraf, with you with regards to how did you see this process being handled so far by, for instance, Home Affairs?
Well, the department obviously reacted on information that was given to it. And it has the responsibility of investigating every single person's identity if and when necessary. It's not new. The department has blocked 1.8 million identities already. And that was simply because there was something suspicious.
Right.
And they simply blocked it on the system.
What classifies as suspicious?
Well, we don't know. The department could be anything. It could be a report, it could be something that came up on ID number, right, or birth certificate that's missing or something. We don't know. They haven't clarified that. So this matter went to court, and the court said, look, we understand that you have a responsibility, which is correct. The department has the sole authority of safeguarding our identity and status. It's also very important in respect of safeguarding the security of the Republic.
Right.
So now they block this, and the judge says, I get it. You have to block this, but follow the law. Now, what does the law state? The law states, if I'm about to take an executive decision or an official decision that's going to materially and adversely affect your rights, then I've got to abide by the Constitution. And the Constitution demands that every action by an official has to be lawful, reasonable, and procedurally fair. Now that leads to a piece of legislation known as PAJA, Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. And that is divided into two sections. One, procedural fairness, and two, substantive fairness. Let's start with procedural fairness. So Section 3 says, if I'm about to take a decision that's going to really impact on you, either as a person or a community, I've got to invite you. I've got to say to you, look, I have a problem with this here.
Right.
Please come forward, come with your legal representatives, come with your documents, let's have a discussion about this. That's the correct way, procedurally. A good example of a procedural defect was a ZEP. Overnight, it was announced that it will no longer be renewed. And the decision was taken without consultation. And that's where you see the pushback and says, no, you've got to consult. Even if you have made up your mind, then give the other side an opportunity to engage. It's a very old rule called audi alteram partem. Listen to the other side. And that is the basis of law. And then you're able to discuss and say, look, I think these documents don't reflect correctly. What do you say? And the person may or may not have an explanation. But you can't mero moto, and this hasn't happened in this case, I must make it clear, by a, just simple signature, sign off a person's citizenship. No. Process. So you have the procedural fairness and then you have substantive fairness. It could be that a person making the decision has made an error of law or error of fact. It could be that he was biased or unreasonable, or it could be unconstitutional. So there's a whole lot of subdivisions, about 9, against which the decision is tested.
I want to dig a little deep in a short while. So, Thebe, that's the legality. Let's talk about the practicality and how it unfolded over the past couple of weeks and the consequences of it for not only Brand South Africa, but for Miss South Africa as a brand. How did you see this playing out?
Well, the way it played out, because if you look at the arguments on social media, for example, there was a lot of we can't have a Nigerian do this, we can't have a foreigner do this. So the way it played out, it seemed to suggest it's South Africa against Nigeria. So it created a perception of Afrophobic, if you will, Afrophobia, if you will, or even xenophobia at its worst. That's sort of how it played out. But I think the broader way in which it played out actually is it actually raised a bigger issue about South Africa, is what does it mean to be South African? Because if you look at the bigger argument that South Africans were having on social media, they were saying we cannot have a Nigerian represent us. She is not like us. She doesn't know what we're about. She is not South African. And I think that was actually the bigger argument. But the way it played out in a much more negative way, which positioned South Africa negatively as anti-foreigner, anti-Nigeria, or anti-any other country. I think that's perhaps the unfortunate part of the argument. But then the arguments were between citizens on social media, so they may not, they would have generally reacted in a more emotive way rather than a legal way, if you will. And that's why some of us, our first argument on this subject was, what is it on the basis of law first? Is this person legal? And did Miss South Africa do the correct vetting? If Miss South Africa said we vetted this person and she's legally a South African, then our argument for many of us were that if she's legally South African, then she must be accorded all the rights which are due to anybody who's a legal citizen of South Africa. That's sort of where we left it off. But in the background was this bigger question of what do people mean when they say she cannot represent us? And what they really meant was she does not embody what it means to be South African. She doesn't champion South Africanship. She doesn't promote who we are as a people.
And that talks to, I guess, the difference between citizenship and identity, right?
Indeed.
There is a, my understanding, there is a difference in terms of one is legal and the other is how you feel, or how you feel, where you feel you belong to.
Wait, you're correct. The legal part is quite simple, actually. It's a straight line. You either registered legally, and I think Ashraf would have spoken to that, and your previous guest spoke to that, whether by birth or by the naturalization or by descent, which are the 3 primary categories, as Ashraf would say, and everybody has said. So it's a simple one to determine. The other one, culturally one, is a very emotive determination. And it is based on hundreds and hundreds of years on how a people define themselves. So when an American says, I'm American, they don't have to say anymore. When a British person says, I'm British, this is British. And it generally goes back to the values of a country. What are the values of the country? What are the cultural expressions of a country? How do people express themselves as a people or identify themselves as a people? So identity is much more complex, it is much more emotive, and it is much more, if you will, subjective as well, compared to citizenship, which is rather objective at best.
Before I go to the digital audience, I see hands up already. Ashraf, help us understand in terms of the SA Citizenship Act. People seem to think that if you are born in South Africa, it's automatic you become a South African citizen. Is it that simple?
No, it's not. It's not. That's the American system, and often, we get confused. So there are 3 primary ways of acquiring citizenship. A, by birth, where one or both parents are South Africans and you're born in the country. B, by descent, where one or both parents are South African citizens, but you weren't born here. So you have a right to citizenship by descent. The third category speaks to the Immigrations Act, which speaks about temporary residence visas, permanent residence, that leads through to naturalization. And then, after naturalization, you're given a certificate of citizenship. And you know, those things are quite complex. But there's a fourth category where the minister has a discretion. If you're of some value, you recall a few years ago, we didn't have a spin bowler. And there was a man waiting for citizenship. He was married to a citizen. He had permanent residence. It was taking time. And they said, we need a spin bowler. Honorary, not honorary, full citizenship. Right. And now he represented South Africa in sport.
Right.
So those are the four categories. Now, if there is some defect in one of those, you would recall that before the Act changed, people born to permanent residence permit holders were citizens. You know, it catered for this huge influx of people from what was then Rhodesia and other parts of the world. So South Africa's population register swelled by citizens. There's a whole lot of citizens that came through the refugee portal that then were applied to, that were eligible to apply for permanent residence and then eligible to apply for citizenship by naturalization. Now there it's not straightforward. You know, the minister has to have an inquiry. He also, you recall in the Gupta case, he had to publish the names in Parliament and call it up and say, listen, I intend to give these people citizenship. So it was an open process. It wasn't something closed. But let's wait and see how the facts unfold. Because look, right now we have zero facts. We just have hearsay evidence.
100%. Let's go to the digital audience now. I see hands up already. Kustas, let's hear from you.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, Blaine, and good evening to your panel. Blaine, I would like to probably begin by saying that South Africa as a country is not a xenophobic country. What has happened here, there were numerous missteps from the government of South Africa who ignored the concerns of South African citizens when it comes to this matter. Home Affairs has let us down deeply. It was not supposed to get to this point. That's why I missed Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, because an issue of national interest of this matter, you do not bury your head for weeks, and only then when the storm hits up, then you rise up and then you say, oh, what happened? This matter, South African citizens wanted to know, is she a South African citizen? And they wanted to hear that from the government. Now, because the government was not responding, the South African Twitter FBI went ahead and did its own proper investigation, which again ended up to this matter. So to judge South Africa, that's the first mistake. Therefore, to judge South Africa as a xenophobic country between South Africa and Nigeria would be inappropriate at this point. South Africa and South Africans, a numerous majority, have welcomed foreign nationals. If we were xenophobic as a country, we would not have such a large number of refugees or even African nationals living among South Africans. Let's use a comparison. Zimbabwe jails it kept its refugees in camps. South Africa has not done that. So it cannot be possible then that we should be judged as a nation, as a character, based on just few people who were on Twitter. South Africa is a great country for refugees, for Africans, and is a welcoming country, including our state. That's my comment.
Christos, thank you very much. Thebe, please respond to that before I go back to our digital.
I mean, he's very correct that by nature, South Africa are very welcoming people. That's why if you look at the DNA of South Africa, Ubuntu, welcoming, is part of who we are. The point was not to say that South Africans were xenophobic, was to say that it created the perception of xenophobic, of Afrophobic tendencies, because if you look at the language that was used, we cannot have Nigerians represent us. are you with me? That you can go through the list of the Twitter. That's sort of the language that people were going, and they were going on and on about what Nigerians have done to South Africa and all those, and there we cannot have this. And so the argument was muddled with issues of other nations and the facts of citizenship. And that's why I was very clear in the beginning. I said that the tonality and the language that was used sounded very Afrophobic and also sounded xenophobic. But the bigger issue that was actually being debated, it perhaps was not as articulate, was the fact that there was the issue that people did not believe that she's South African, citizenship, and they also, irrespective, they did not believe, even if she was a citizen, by the way, I think there was also a feeling that even if she was a citizen, she certainly doesn't qualify to be an ambassador of South Africa because she doesn't embody the culture and doesn't promote South Africanism. And again, they based it on what they see. They went onto her social media, and they realized that in her social media, she is mostly promoting Nigeria or Mozambique, but mostly Nigeria. So the reactions were anti that, and then it brought into fact the fact that there is this simmering South Africa versus Nigeria tension that has always been going on. And of course, if you remember whether it's 2008 to 2013, we had this flare-up of xenophobic attack. So whenever people have languages like, we don't want Nigerians here, or we don't want foreigners to represent us, they're not South African, it brings up those emotions again.
Let's go back to digital audience. Control, please. I can't see the bottom part of the screen, so if you can please help me out there. I can't see the names. But let's go to Utando. Your thoughts, Utando?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity, Blaine. I also do agree with the experts in the studio in regards to the last point that they made, that even if Ms. Chidimma was proven to be South African, she didn't showcase anything to indicate that. When it comes to entering a pageant, especially Miss South Africa, that is our biggest national pageant that we have. So she didn't really exude that South African spirit that a title holder would need. The Miss South African organization was probably attempting to showcase how South Africa is an immigrant country and used Ms. Chidimma as a beacon of anti-xenophobia. However, it doesn't change the fact that her social presence didn't highlight her South African story to balance the obvious ties that she has with Nigeria. When you enter a pageant, you curate your life to match what the organizers and audience is looking for, and we didn't see much of that. So by comparison to other contestants, they will shine because they seem like typical South Africans with things as little as their names. So I understand wanting to take a chance to represent a community, but if that community doesn't accept you, it does hurt, but you have to take that loss and move on. It's too sentimental, Miss South Africa, for South Africans to not speak up about who they do and do not want representing them on the world stage, and that's fair. It's not a team sport. It's like a cultural sport with only one player. So we are entitled to pick the best one. The language was terrible, and the petition that came out was also very heartbreaking to see. But South Africans did have that opportunity to were entitled to that opportunity to express their grief. And it is unfortunate that her mother has also made things very difficult for her now, because she allowed her daughter to fly this close to the sun, knowing exactly what crime she committed so many years ago.
As we said, the outcomes of that investigation is not forthcoming. They're still investigating. So in terms of any proportion of guilt, that's still yet to be determined. Also, we did we tried to get the Home Affairs Department, as I mentioned at the top. Hopefully we'll get some answers soon. Selo, let's hear from you, and then we'll go to Fuzile before we take a quick break. Selo, can you hear me? All right.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, go ahead,
Selo. Opportunity. Good evening, panels and guests. My question is, I don't know, maybe we could have had someone from Home Affairs to explain this issue. The first question is she having a South African ID? And secondly, I think she was able or eligible to apply for citizenship by naturalization because of she has already attained maturity. So by the time she turned 18, she was supposed to apply for South African citizenship. Now, I think ignorance of the law is not an excuse. So she also had a duty to act on her best interest if she knew that she was going to enter the beauty pageant for Mrs. South Africa. So my question is, what is she currently using?
Right. Look, the first question, I'm not sure, and I guess the Home Affairs can answer that. But in terms of the naturalization part, Ashraf, help us understand that to Silo's question in terms of how does that work?
So that was never in question here. Remember, she was born in a South African hospital to a parent ostensibly who was a South African citizen. And this happens daily. So that's not, the naturalization is only for immigrants coming through the temporary residence route, then applying for permanent residence, then applying for naturalization. So that's a completely different set of circumstances. As far as I know, that was never the case here. She always understood herself to be a South African citizen with a foreign parent or a foreign sets of parents. Now, when you're born in South Africa, a specific ID number is allocated to you at birth. So that number stays with you forever. So what would have given her an indication that, look, I'm not a South African citizen, you know, by feeling or by birth or whatever. And we don't know what the mother's response was here. So there's too many unanswered questions. We have to take, Home Affairs says they've got prima facie evidence. That means on face value. They haven't revealed it. I don't think they have a duty to reveal this to the Republic. They have a duty to reveal it to the applicant that is now affected by this decision and have a conversation with them. And whatever the facts are, they would speak for themselves. If at the end of the day, the mother acquired her documentation through fraud or whatever illegal means, the results are quite clear. Her citizenship will collapse. That of her child will also be removed. And now that applicant will have to follow the citizenship of either of her parents and then apply to be a citizen of that country. It's simple. Now, it's not the first time this has happened, as I say. There's now 700,000 IDs that are blocked. And at present, right now, Home Affairs is suffering from a backlog of 200,000 temporary residence visas that haven't been processed. The erstwhile minister said at least 40% of those are due to spousal relationships because they can't make sense of, you know, or they can't verify these relationships. So I think there's also capacity or lack of capacity on the part of the department. There's also an attempt to get our 300 million pieces of paper digitized. So that's the other thing, and it's going back to the 1900s. And look, the South African fabric is made up completely of foreigners. You know, the mining industry, agricultural industry, forever was built on the sweat of foreigners. So, you know, it's part of our society. But having said that, there's no doubt, you know, South Africans will say we are not xenophobic. But the Immigrations Act in its preamble, in the last part, says they must take steps to avoid xenophobia. So even technically and legally, there was an appreciation that there has to be an education about this.
Correct.
Thebe, you take us to break. You want to just comment on that?
No, I agree with him because one of the biggest problems of South Africa is, other than the idea of defining what it means to be South Africa, it is also educating and institutionalizing what it means to be South Africa and our relationship with the rest of the continent. Because if you look at some of the challenges that we have as South Africans, have been primarily with fellow Africans and not with South Africans of European extraction, because they have pretty much been left alone. The focus has always been with the one person who sells a loaf of bread, rather than the one person who owns 3 million hectares of land.
All right, we're going to come back. We need to take a quick break. Fuzile, I know I promised you we're going to come to you in a short while. We're exploring the various issues that is linked to the case that is currently, Home Affairs is currently investigating. As I said, we did invite them. They are only going to talk after the outcomes of such investigations. We shall see what it unfolds or what is unearthed through these investigations. But what is important is understanding the process and understanding how do we get here and understanding the difference between citizenship and identity. More after the break. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. I want to go straight now to our digital audience. No time to waste. Lots of questions to be asked. Fuzile, you had your hand up. Sorry, I couldn't get to you earlier. Let's hear your question, comment.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, panel and the hosts. And yeah, thank you for having me. I just have a question, and it's because of the comments that were made just before we went to the ad break. And I think it's valid where we can critique the way in which things have been done, the process, and also this assertion or suggestion that when the matter has been handled, that maybe perhaps the public shouldn't be informed. I find that it is important that we know exactly what happened and how they came to that conclusion, whether it's the mother being acquitted or being found guilty. We need to know exactly. We need to have that transparency going forward. However, I also need to take a moment to just point out that it's a bit of everything. You can say that there was some Afrophobic sentiments involved, and that plays into stereotypes. However, you also need to look at the fact that here in South Africa, there is a trend of taking Miss South Africa very, very seriously. Yeah. So Chidimma wouldn't be the first victim of this. There was a few years ago, some lady, I think her name was Bianca, who there was an entire Twitter campaign where they went through an entire Twitter and they found the most racist Twitter tweets that she had made years ago. And a few years ago, just like about a year or two ago, there was a girl who, it was found that in high school, she was bullying other people and she basically didn't have any remorse about it. And she was called out on that. So there is a trend here in South Africa that if you are a Miss South Africa contestant, you need to make sure that you are squeaky clean, or else if they find something, they cling onto it. And as they said, it seems as if we take it so seriously because you are seen as a representative of South Africa. And there may have been some form of stereotype associated with the fact that she does have a Nigerian mother. But we also can't dispel the fact that South African Twitter does have a tendency of going through people's social media and seeing if they are really representatives or well, fit enough to be representatives of the country or not on the world stage. And so Chidimma wouldn't be the first one. Unfortunately, this is what it has come to, but she wouldn't be the first one, nor will she be the last one.
Right.
You know, Blaine, there's
go on to
there's the one thing you said which I agree with, and maybe a bit of a disagree with Ashraf, is I think this is a teachable moment for South Africa, and it has to be transparent. So I think in this instance, if nothing else, the minister does have or the government has got an obligation to disclose the process, to disclose the findings and the reasons for the findings, because the mistake that we tend to make in the country is by resolving things privately and not being transparent. By being transparent, you are teaching the country, you are enabling that in future there's a self-selection, that people who want to take those chances, they now know what it means to be South African and not South African. And the second point that Fuzile says about South Africa and South Africans going into people's backgrounds to understand it, he's correct as well. That it's not just it's not because part of identity of being South African is understanding the diversity of South Africa, embracing the diversity of South Africa, embracing embracing the cultures of South Africa, which is the language and the tribes and everything else, and embracing what South Africa stands for, the values of South Africa. But I was saying to Ashraf during the break, he says to me, yeah, but we don't know what South Africa stands for. I said, precisely, that is the challenge that we're facing as a country, that we do not have a definitive and harmonized and all agreed and understood a set of values that we said, this is who we are, that everybody says, yes, this is how you behave as a South African.
Transparency, Ashraf, is important, but we must understand that we're dealing with human beings here as well. There's consequences as well for whatever is put out there in this public sphere. To what extent is this transparency needed from government?
Well, Blaine, let me precede that sentence by saying our dignity is the most important part of our personality. A Supreme Court, a Constitutional Court judge says, dignity knows no nationality. Let's start with that. And dignity is an aspect of the Constitution. Now, when we say transparency, it's like saying to the police, when you're investigating something, give us a blow-by-blow account of your investigations. I think that's counterproductive. The minister's decision can be tested in a court of law. Section 8 provides for a review in a court of law. So there's transparency. And you can join the legal process by being a friend of the court and saying, look, I think the court will benefit by this opinion or that opinion. So there's transparency written for you. What I'm emphasizing is the rule of law. There's a law that governs all of these things. And let the legal process take its course. We cannot prejudge it and we cannot terminate it before it's completed.
Right. Back to the digital audience. Ntato, let's hear from you. If you can unmute. Let's unmute. There we go.
As a South African, I am a bit worried because this issue highlights a lot of things, especially when it comes to corruption in South Africa. I think this is a byproduct of corruption. In South Africa, we have seen people who are alive having death certificates. We have also seen military camps. So I believe that it is just highlighting the issue that we have with Home Affairs. And as a South African, I'm worried about the security of the nation, who gets in and out of the country. So I am quite worried about that. I think we should highlight the Home Affairs and its competency and talk about the issues when it comes to bribe, buying a drink, who gets what. You know that in South Africa, most of the time you can get any paper as long as you have financial means. A lot of people come in and out of country because they have financial means, despite their intentions, even though you find that someone has a lot of money and they have ill intentions about the country, and they can do as they please as long as they have money. So I think we need to talk about that as South Africa, and we need to actually introspect as a nation.
Right,
thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Umpolosa, let's hear from you.
Good evening, Bain, and all the viewers who are watching tonight. For me, I would say that definitely this Chidimma case has been a very debate-provoking case in that it has highlighted, I would agree, elements of Afrophobia because there's also been other participants. I'm going to make an example of Cherry Wang, which a lot of people on social media have also been bringing forth to the conversation to say when Cherry Wang, who has a descent of Asia, applied to be part of Miss SA, the reaction that she has received versus the one that Chidimma has received are not the same, which was going back to what one of our guests were saying, that there were elements of xenophobia, if we can take it to that extent, and Afrophobia that were expressed here, which does not justify, while her citizenship is in question, it did not justify the bullying and the attacks that were coming towards her. And I think for me, those are the elements of Afrophobia. The statements which have been said are the bullying, the cyberbullying. How do we then go back if the end of this case, it comes out that she is truly a citizen. She is truly a citizen of South Africa. And all of these attacks have happened. How do we then go back as a nation to apologize, firstly, by the way that we have reacted towards that, but also how do we move forward as a country in terms of dealing with the question of what actually makes a South African citizen? How do we redefine citizenship, including those who have come and those who were birthed here? But again, I have to also agree with the whole question of of corruption, this has revealed to us that there's been a lot of corruption that is happening within organizations that are meant to be protecting those of its citizens, but that has not been happening. So for me, I think the Chidimma case shouldn't just end as a Chidimma case that we have trapped her, we have got her. It shouldn't be a targeting case, but rather it should be an opening of a conversation of how do we deal with the problems that we are facing in Home Affairs, because there's been more identity thefts, not just Chidimma. This should be a conversation opener. So how do we go forth with this conversation? How do we hold Home Affairs accountable? What do we deal also with the people that have been found in guilty of such cases? Right. So for me, it's more of where are we going as a nation in terms of re-looking at our own organizations, dealing with our own corruption, but also as a nation dealing with also some of the hate that we have towards our fellow brothers and sisters in the neighboring borders, because that's not what our European counterparts receive when they come here. We welcome them, but why is it that when it's now an African neighbor, the reactions seem to be more harsher? So for me, I think this has become more political than just what we are looking at the surface area.
And Thebe, I think two things can be true at the same time, isn't it? You can have elements of hatred and working off a base of hate and Afrophobia or xenophobia, but there also are people that are concerned in the way certain people are representing them. And I'm not talking about this case in particular, I'm talking generally. How do we get to a place where there's a common understanding of who we are as a people, as a nation?
I think, the challenge that we have in this country is every 5 years we run for elections. What we should be doing is and we don't have a clear vision of the country for the next 500 years, because we go from election to election rather than going to long term. We need a consultative forum to get South Africans talking and defining and contributing to what it means to be South African. It's not good enough just to say we've got 11 languages or 12 languages, we're South African, we're diverse. We don't know. We need to harmonize the values of the country. The way I do it right now, I'd say that let's go out as South Africa, whether it's from a government or whoever leads it, maybe arts and culture. Let's lead a process to define and to get agreement on the values that South Africans believe these embody and what South Africans is. And also to just define how do you express South Africanism, and also our relationship with the rest of the world, not just our rest of Africa and all those, and how we interact. Because what we need to create a scorecard, a scorecard of what it means to sign up for South Africanism. Because you can come as a foreigner here the day tomorrow and sign up to that by saying that I buy into this. We go to America and we say we love what America stands for: freedom, enterprise, and ability to become who we are. And if you buy into that, America accepts you. Right. So in South Africa, for example, what do I buy into when I come here? Freedom is very important to us as South Africans. Diversity is a fact of life on South Africa. Tolerance is a fact of life, but it is a bit dodgy in terms of whether it is really, it is in practice a tolerant country.
Conversation definitely needs to be part of the cure, Ashraf, but there are real world issues, real life problems within the Home Affairs Department that gives rise to certain issues that people are talking about. How best can Home Affairs insulate themselves from fraudulent activities?
That's a very difficult task. It's almost like, I have to quote the erstwhile minister. He says, even if he breaks it down to the last man, he's going to get down to the bottom of corruption. It's very, very difficult. Without mandatory lifestyle test or, whatever test that they employ, or maybe even, and it's not really reliable, the polygraph tests or whatever. Yeah. It's difficult. Now, part of, I think, the solution is to utilize technology, artificial intelligence. There's various ways of using technology to benefit the department. We now move to, for example, to a digitized passport. You can get a passport in 3 days. Right. And I mean, those things are all captured digitally, so there's efficiency. Of course, the journey is very, very long. South Africa is a new democracy. And we're learning as we're going along. There was the initial period, and then there was all of these things that happened recently, and now it seems to be that we're taking the corner. But I just want to say that, we mustn't sell ourselves short. South Africa is highly and deeply respected in the world.
Of course.
In the world of sports, they returned the rugby. In the world of legal excellence, in the ICJ, you saw how these lawyers were head and shoulders above everyone else. They were celebrated all over the world. They brought justice back into focus. So South Africa has got so much to offer. Tourism, for example, it's one of the best countries to visit. I mean, we hear these things. A lot needs, of course, there are problems on the ground and there are frustrations when there's no jobs and when you perceive somebody else who's doing better than you and he comes from, of course we have to deal with all of those things, but there are solutions and we need to look and examine those solutions. But Home Affairs definitely has to deeply introspect how it's going to change its approach to how it manages this very, very important portfolio.
Right. I agree with you that, we're a very fragile democracy. We're a work in progress because it's impossible to change a history of 375 years in 30 years. But what we need to do is, as we need to grow as we learn, or learn as we grow. And part of doing that is by institutionalizing. Because, part of what I said earlier in terms of mobilizing, getting agreement and all those, we also need to institutionalize. We need to bring this into the curricula of schools. So it must be easy for anybody growing up, a young kid, what it takes to be a South African. So right now, if you can see the issues on social media and all those, you could see, even listen to various comments, that we don't all have the same understanding. Whereas a kid in America, sorry for using that country, for all its ills and its shortcomings, but because anybody knows that if I can just step into America and give birth there, I'm American. Everybody knows that. Does everybody know the 4 categories of how to become citizen in South Africa? Not really. Does everybody know what are the values of South Africa? Not really. Does everybody know the history of South Africa's struggle through hearsay? So that's why we always say that if you speak to a normal 2000 or born free, South African apartheid and colonialization was just a figment of the old people's imagination. Similarly, because we have not institutionalized these learnings and these experiences. And part of what you're talking, part of what was said earlier, Ashraf, and that's why transparency is also important. Transparency and communication are important because those are also going to enable that if I don't put it in writing, certainly I put it out verbally, that it gets to know.
I see your hands up, Gustav. Let's give you the last word.
Thank you very much, Blaine. Here's a report on June 2022, report from the Ministerial Committee on the issuance of permits and visas. It revealed that about 36,647 fraudulent permits and visa applications were detected. 12,177 of those were from Nigerian nationals alone. Now, this is a ministerial audit that was done. Action SA released this on August the 8th. So we as South Africans, we know our identity. We do not stand for corruption and crime. Our democracy had to withstand a lot of trials and stuff like that. So we are clear of who we are. We do not tolerate corruption. We do not appreciate this level of corruption that affects the Nigerian citizens. Hence, Home Affairs is a cesspool right now because these nationals here, 12,000 of them, would not be in this country the way that they are if there was no corruption there. So our identity is very clear. Our democracy is robust. We are not confused. We are clear of who we are. Thank you for taking my call.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. Go on. Last word.
It means that South Africans are at issue, have other problems as well, because there are no foreign nationals who run Home Affairs. It's run by South Africans. So it means that South Africans, we are also complicit in the problem that we have in the country. So it goes back to part of those big values as South Africans that we need to go back and define those values, 100%. And one of them being honesty or integrity as an important value that we need to bring back into South African society.
We'll have to leave it there, and we'll make an undertaking to get the Home Affairs Department as soon as they become available to, whatever platforms on the SABC News. You'll get some answers there, because thank you very much indeed, Ashraf. Thank you very much indeed, Thebe. Always a pleasure having you on the program. Digital audience, value added, no doubt. All right, before we go, here's my take. The controversy surrounding the Miss SA contestant has definitely become a polarizing conversation, and I guess it kicks up a lot of questions that forces us to ask the hard questions about ourselves, about who we are as a nation, the intention behind bringing these issues to the fore. What does it mean to be a South African? Who has the right to represent this country? Big umbrella questions, right? And for me, it once again highlights the separation question. Is it fact or is it feel? Am I bringing up issues because I feel it's the right thing to do, perhaps should be done in a certain way, or are there facts to back up the way I feel? It's an important distinction for me. I think we need to have more conversations around citizenship, which is seen as a legal concept, versus identity, which is defined as the fact of being who or what a person is, and by extension, where you feel you belong. No doubt, as Thebe said, South Africa is a work in progress. I'm a work in progress. You probably are a work in progress, and that's fine. It gives us an opportunity to talk and let conversation be part of the solution. But know that animus and bad intentions and hatred are often not agents for good change. We have to be better than what we oppose, and that's my take. The news continues. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.